we see gold increasing in other countries, but it's decreasing in America. This is a very beautiful representation of what's called the Triffin dilemma. Hey everybody, welcome. My name is Matthew. Thank you very much for joining. Today we're going to continue on a little bit of an addendum to one of the recent video series that I did, which was gold that a selection of countries held versus the money that they issued, the money that the central bank printed. Okay, there was a ratio, a percentage, and we went through that for a couple hundred years for these countries. I figured it would be helpful just to go back and do a couple summary lessons to that series, as well as just show you what is the actual gold, not as a percentage of the money, but actually in ounces. And this is the way that I prefer to look at it. When you look at it in tons, which is the way it's usually reported, this is difficult to sort of understand, get your head around. But if you see here just in pure raw ounces of gold, you can find the value by multiplying by roughly $2,500 as of this recording, or this is only going to March, but the price now is about $2,500, or $35 an ounce if you looked at 100 years ago, or $20 an ounce if you looked at 150 years ago. Okay, so a couple notes. Obviously, the United States dollar being the world reserve currency for the last 100 years or so now, not fully 100 years, but certainly after World War II and the Bretton Woods standard, we see that the most gold of these major selected countries in the world indeed lies in the United States. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't even more gold in the United States that was earmarked for other countries. That's true. And see my video on the amazing, sick race that the Nazis had trying to steal most of Europe's gold in central banks. See that link in the description. I gave a presentation at BTC Prague a couple years ago on that. But basically this period here of during World War II, we see gold skyrocketing, and most of the gold that was in European vaults prior to the start of Nazi Germany's invasion across Europe ended up in Canada, in the US, in the Caribbean. But nonetheless, this is gold, again, that is earmarked to each country. It's not necessarily where the gold exists. And indeed, most of the time during this Bretton Woods system, most of that gold was in the United States. So a couple things to point out. Yes, we can see that the dollar world reserve standard started post World War II with the Bretton Woods conference. But interestingly here, look as when Bretton Woods starts to end, we see gold increasing in other countries, but it's decreasing in America. Okay, and this is a very beautiful representation of what's called the Triffin dilemma. Okay, so as the world grows and demands dollars to be held as its reserve, that is other central banks around the world. These are just a selection of them, but Poland, even Russia after the 1990s, certain central banks around the world would demand foreign currency reserves in the dollar. The dollar itself, the Federal Reserve, which was backed, and again, this backing is not a word I like so much because the percentage is usually not that high. It was high during World War II, but typically not that high of the monetary base outstanding. This backing of dollars, of course, is going to have to fall, because as the demand for dollars increases, due to the safe haven status of the world reserve currency, more dollars must be printed. Okay, so more dollars were printed, and thus, as dollar demand rose, gold demand in the United States fell. But interestingly here, we can see that central banks around the world also purchase gold more than they had before. And to really see that, let's take off the United States here right now. Okay, so here we see this is the heydays of the classical gold standard leading up to World War I. Notice how little gold there actually is. And then, you can get to a ratio that is 10 times higher here for foreign central banks, that is non-American central banks, by the eve of the end of the Bretton Woods standard. So that's very interesting. So it shows you this is just a completely different economy. This is a different world that we're in. And yeah, we're moving into the fiat world. But gold still had a fighting chance here. Charles de Gaulle famously was reclaiming a lot of gold from the United States, that is in the United States coffers, back onto French soil in the 60s. This is one of the last acts he did as president. Let's put just France here. There you see this happening. Okay, a lot of gold. Then they went more just to the dollar standard here after as the Bretton Woods standard started. But then in the 60s, with the Vietnam War still running hot for the United States, balance of payments still decreasingly going negative for the United States, national debt increasing for the United States, de Gaulle called back gold and bought gold. This is just France buying more gold, even though they're also holding dollars. Okay, so this is very interesting. And a lot of people credit de Gaulle, even though this was a couple of years before Bretton Woods actually ended and they couldn't get some of the gold back, they credited de Gaulle with the straw that broke the camel's back of the Bretton Woods system. But look, this is just France. It actually is a similar pattern for all countries in Europe. Here's Germany, here's Italy, Norway is an exception. We'll get back to that. Sweden's an exception. Here's Switzerland. And United Kingdom, it's actually an exception. They knew they were already on their way out for the currency, reserve currency status that was back pre-World War I and around World War I, where the pound sterling had reserve currency status. But these are the major European countries. Let's even take off UK. You can clearly see that they're ramping up their gold holdings while they're also still holding dollars. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. And then, of course, you can kind of see the gold price here in that golden line. It's increasing very rapidly after the Bretton Woods standard ends. Central banks actually trim a little bit of the holdings there as the gold price is very high, and then it just stays flat here for a few more years. And then Brown's bottom, which most central banks were buying more at the nadir of the gold price, all right, which was the 20-year bear in 2000. Let's look at the UK. They were selling. Okay, let's just zoom in here so you can see it clearly. We'll put Sweden and Norway back, but look, the UK is selling. Unbelievable. You can see that Brown's bottom was a reflection of price here, but they even sold a little bit more all the way until 2002, where they hit a very, very low, not even 10 million ounces of gold, which exists on the books today for the United Kingdom. Taking a moment to remind you that this show is brought to you by Trezor, home of the original Bitcoin hardware wallet. For over 10 years now, Trezor means business in Bitcoin security and functionality. When using their wallet software Trezor Suite to connect to the Bitcoin network, you're automatically connected via Tor, protecting your identity and giving you full control of your coins in a fully open source manner, both on the software level and on the hardware level. So head on over to Trezor.io to grab your brand new Trezor Safe 5 with a secure element, as well as a ton of available accessories to back up your keys and keep your coins safe. Let's look back. Norway and Sweden, these are two famously societies that are trying to go cashless. Sweden still has some gold. Let's take the UK off. Sweden has some gold. Norway has trimmed it to zero. Okay, we talked about this. Norway has no gold anymore from about 15 years ago, 20 years ago even. So that's Norway. We know that they have a sovereign wealth fund, which is huge, over $1.5 trillion worth of value, which is certainly a great way to run pensions for your citizens. Norwegians are very smart there. But then we have Canada as well. Let's put Canada on. This was a very major player in the free banking world in the 1800s. They started their central bank here in early 1930s, 1933 or so, opened their doors. We see that they were increasing their gold as well all the way through Bretton Woods, even interestingly more than, well, I shouldn't say more, but it seems comparatively a lot even to Norway and Sweden. Of course, it's not comparable to Germany, but compared to Norway and Sweden, they were increasing a lot. But like Norway, Canada with a free banking system, relatively few, in fact, no bank failures historically that were of any real consequence. Real interesting, competitive free banking system. At the same time, about or thereabouts as Norway, a little bit after actually, about 10 years ago, they decided to shed all of their gold as well. So, not necessarily a good decision if you look at it from the perspective of the balance sheet of the Bank of Canada as the price of gold continues to rise, but that was their decision. Nonetheless, I just wanted to show you that this is actually how the full picture looks with all non-major central banks in the world here. We see that they're massively increasing their holdings, even though they have more dollars in their coffers as a reserve. They still wanted more gold as the Vietnam War was chugging along and the Bretton Woods system ended. And then they kind of followed the United States' lead. And I remind you, dear viewer, that the Fort Knox trove of gold has not been audited since the Eisenhower administration. So that's another interesting point, whether this 260 million ounces or so of United States gold is even there. Nonetheless, everybody's kind of frozen it more or less during the fiat standard, and some countries such as Canada and Norway, major powers in the Western world, have completely shed their gold. I'm not showing it on this chart, but you can see that from these major countries, the peak was around 1965, okay? We get here somewhere at around 900 million ounces if you added all these up. That's not the actual number. If you added the rest of the world, it'd be something like 1.1 billion ounces of gold, all right? About 900 million ounces on this chart. Total world gold in central bank and treasury coffers at this time in the mid-60s, 1.1 billion ounces. That was a record. Okay, very interesting. Again, 5-6 times higher than it was here, and that's including the United States decrease, okay, by the mid-60s. But of course, it seems like the world has sort of shed its gold, or its confidence in the gold value as a reserve here, but that's of course not true, because if you looked at the BRICS countries, Poland, other countries in the world that I'm not showing on this chart, they are increasing. And indeed, recently, in the last few years, we have crossed the record ounces of gold in central bank coffers, which was about 1.1 billion ounces in 1965. Now, in 2024, there's about 1.2 billion ounces of gold in coffers, even though I'm just showing you the main Western countries in this chart. Hopefully this gave you a little bit more of a perspective of how the gold trade has worked officially. Central banks are by no means small players, and let's see how they react to the rise in the gold price in the future. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching.